You're listening to Unjiggered, a bartender podcast where we interview highly successful bartenders about their careers, lives, and the passion of bartending. This week we caught up with Nico De Soto, bar owner of Danico in Paris, Mace in New York, and Kaido in Miami, who found his passion for travel in Australia and who designs drinks with flavour ideas from all over the world. With this podcast, we want to peel back the mask and discover just how the greats really became the greats. So sit back and enjoy.
Hello, my name is Nico De Soto. I'm a bartender and owner of Mace in New York, Danico in Paris, and Kaido in Miami.
Cool. Thank you very much for coming over. So let's talk a little bit about you. You are the well-known industry travel superstar. Like you literally are probably the bartender who travels the most.
I travel a lot. No, it's true. I'm not behind the bar of my bars anymore, so I do a lot of travels.
Is it like you try to combine a passion for traveling, or did traveling just come up as a
no,
work opportunity?
It's I start bartending because I was traveling, and I kept on doing that because it's possible to travel and bartend. Originally, my first real travel was going to Australia. You know, they release a working holiday visa for friends, and the moment I saw that on TV, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna save money. I stop what I'm doing, and I'm gonna go there for 1 year. And over there, you know, I needed a job, so I fell in love with two things: traveling and bartending. Bartending, why? You know, so you need to, of course, work in Australia if you stay for 1 year. And I was like, why not the bar? You know, you work at night, you have fun, you drink, you party. So for me, it was I didn't know the whole world of cocktails. I didn't know, you know, in France we had a very bad scene. It was not at all what it was now, so I didn't know that you could do all the stuff. I didn't know that the spirit tastes good, because the only spirit we were having when we were going out was like the cheap one to buy in the supermarket. So I fell in love with everything, and then, you know, little by little, went back to France, start working for Experimental Cocktail Club. Opened for them the one in London, the one in New York, and after that, you know, I wanted to open my own bar, and Greg Baum from Cocktail Kingdom offered me the spot where it was in East Village, and it's all start from there. And after that, of course, you know, with the consulting, the pop-ups, because before the pop-ups were not really famous, and now like it's getting crazy with that. So doing that a lot during the year, and I try to combine, you know, visiting as well, because it's important when you go to a city that you visit the city as well, not just going and drinking, but, you know, there's a lot of stuff to see, there's a lot of people to meet, and yeah. It's
a little bit of our industry problem, is it? Sometimes when you do guest shifts, because you end up in a city for 3 days, and you meet some friends, and then you go out, drink, bar, and then you leave, and you haven't even seen anything of the city.
Yeah. And that's a shame, you know, like, especially, you know, sometimes the people they invite you to do a guest shift to show you, of course, their bar and what they're doing, but to show you their culture and their country and their city as well. So, you know, staying in your hotel room, even if you're hangover, I think it's almost a bit insulting, you know, for the people inviting you.
So what were you doing before you moved to Australia?
Oh my God, I had a computer science degree originally, so nothing to do with the bar. I hated it. We were like 100 people. It was probably like 95 guys talking about video games all day. So I was like, I'm gonna get out of here. And I did a few little jobs. You know, I did modeling for a little while when I was young. I did postman as well.
Oh, really?
And after that, I was gonna go back to study, you know, and then they released that visa for Australia. So I was like, and that changed totally my career.
So how was Australia when you arrived there? Like, what year are we talking, more or less?
It was end of 2004.
Okay, cool.
So I went 2 years, that one, and then went back in 2007 for another year.
Where did you decide to go in Australia? Which city?
Oh, so the first year I stayed in Sydney for 5 months.
Okay.
And then the winter I went to Cairns, because, you know, the winter it was warmer over there.
Mm-hmm.
And the second year I came back, I live in Melbourne. Mm-hmm. And then I went to Cairns again for the winter. And then we bought a camper van, so I was traveling with my ex-girlfriend all around Australia and pretty much covering, I think we did 20,000 kilometers driving.
No way. How was that?
It was good, but long, you know, like you in Australia, you drive on those roads, like you're going to drive from one point to another. It's 400 kilometers. And you're like, oh, we're going to stay there. And you arrive there and there's just a petrol station and a saloon or something like that. You know, so we're like, oh, okay, we're going to drive to the next city. Then it's 400 more kilometers. And, you know, so long road. So it can be a bit, and I was the only one driving, but, it was fun. You know, sometimes you can't really drive at night because you have animals on the road, so it can be very dangerous. All the kangaroos, for example, they when they see the light of the car, they jump on you.
Really?
So, yeah. So it's very dangerous. So basically, when it starts to get dark, you stop the car and you sleep. But when you wake up, sometime, you know, like, so you drive a little bit with the darkness, and then you park, and of course you sleep, and you wake up in the morning. And you have the best sunrise, you know, sometimes you see a landscape that you didn't see because when you park, it was dark. You have the best wake up morning call in Australia.
So after Australia, you realized you really like bartending. What was your next step after that?
Oh, but after, what do you mean?
After Australia, where did you go? Because I'm sure your visa
So
finished.
after Australia, basically when I went, my plan to go in Australia was just to go to Sydney and stay there 1 year. And then I was like, but why staying only in Sydney? So I went to Cairns, and then I was like, oh, but you have New Zealand next to it. So I went to New Zealand for 1 month, and I was, oh, but we're close to Fiji. So I went to Fiji. And I went to Hong Kong on the way back to France. And then I got bitten, you know, like by travels. So I worked for 1 year in France, and then start traveling backpacking in South America. So we did Argentina, no, I think we did Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, then Easter Island, then Tahiti, and then Australia again for 1 year. And after that, Indonesia for 2 months, Malaysia, Borneo. So yeah, then all I wanted to do is travel and visit like new countries.
How did you sustain this travel? Did you work somewhere while we were doing it?
Yeah, but basically I was working behind the bar in France, saving, then traveling for 4 or 5 months, then working again, you know, in Australia, and then traveling again, and etc. You know.
Did you work in some other destinations where, like, say, in South America? Did you do some?
No. Of course, you know, I did a lot of guest shift, but work like a regular work behind the bar. No, only in Vancouver.
Okay.
For the Winter Games, I think we worked like 2 months there.
Okay. At what point did you decide, okay, I need to find a stable job or a...
Well, it's pretty late. You know, I started bartending, I was 28. So, and I didn't know it would be my career. But at the beginning, it was just for food. And then I realized, you know, because in France, it was not really a job. A bartender, people would say, oh, you're bartending. Are you still student or something? You know, it was not it's not a career. Then I realized being bar manager, you can actually make decent money, and you know, there's good bar, and then yeah, for me it was it.
What was the first bar you managed?
Experimental Cocktail Club. No, actually it was Mama Shelter. Mama Shelter, it's a hotel in Paris. So we did the opening. I was working with my assistant was Joseph Acavant, who has Mabel in Paris, and we worked there a little bit, and then I joined the team at ECC, and yeah.
What year are we talking?
So ECC, it was 2009.
Okay, so more or less at the beginning of it, was it?
Yeah, they opened in 2007. They basically launched the scene in Paris. I mean, there is some cool bar before that's more classic and hotels bar, but they really launched it. You know, like the American way of bar, like speakeasy style a little bit, even if it's not a speakeasy, but you know, those kind of drink. They got the help of Audrey Sanders on the menu, and that changed the scene. If you see all the bars today in Paris, I think like pretty much everyone worked for them at some point.
Oh, really?
For example, I was behind the bar with Karina, who has Candelaria, and Josh. And yeah, like after that, some other guys work and join the team, and now they have their own bar. So it's
Which one came first? Was it the one in London or the one in Paris?
The one in Paris. Paris was 2007. We opened London in December 2010, and New York, I think, in April 2012. Yeah.
So did you go to open the one in London?
Yes.
Okay. How was that experience for you?
It was good. It was, for me, it was a big challenge because I was just a bartender, and for me, London, I was looking at London, my God, this is the real scene, you know, like this is, people are not joking
The
over
real
there.
deal, yeah.
And I was like a bit, well, now I have to make my proof. How do we say that? You know,
Prove
like,
myself,
to prove
yeah.
myself. So yeah, but it was good. It was good. It was very exciting to live in a new city again, with a great bar scene, and it was a big challenge, and I really liked it. Yeah.
What did you do after ECC?
After ACC, so after we moved, we went to open the one in New York, and after that, so basically I had a little story. So I was dating a girl for 3 years at that time, and she came with me in New York, and she hated New York, and we broke up, and she went back to Europe, and I decided to go back for her back to Europe. So
After you broke up.
after yeah
Tactical
to
mistake
get
right there,
her
my
back.
friend.
So I came back to London. Basically for that, so I left TCC, and at that time we were looking for location with Tony C and Coco. I don't know if you know Coco.
Yeah.
Coco Pusher. So we looked for location for a year, basically 10 months. Couldn't find something right, and during that time, I was working a bit at Happiness Forgets and 69 Cobra Crow. And I wasn't sure anymore if I wanted to do something in London. I went to Brazil for 1 month to clear my mind. Travel by myself, and I decided no, London is not the right fit. At the same moment, Greg told me, listen, I have that spot in East Village. Do you want to open a bar together? And that's where Mace starts, you know. And a few months later, we opened.
Let's talk a little bit about ECC for a moment, because it's the one of the few companies that actually open a place in Paris, then London, then New York, which are 3 completely different markets, right?
2 different, completely different. And they open in Ibiza as well.
Ah, okay. That's even a more different market.
More different market. They have a beach club. I mean, yeah, it's they knew what to do. I think London was a huge success. Very busy from the beginning. Good location. New York closed, unfortunately. But yeah, no, it's the point at that time was I was going to be the bar manager, open venues, Shanghai, Sydney. You know, they were aiming more cities. I think they changed a little bit now. They're more focused on hotels.
Okay.
And some restaurant at some point as well.
How did you change the product from one city to the other, or were you trying to keep it as close as possible to the original one, or were you changing it?
No, I changed. I mean, my type of drink in London and New York were pretty much basically the same. Of course, you know, like you have to adjust according to the people's palate. I think in London, the palate is way drier than New York.
Okay.
So I remember when I live in New York for a little bit before we opened ECC London. I left the group, and then they came and asked me to open in ECC in London with them. I worked at Painkiller and Dram during that time. So I was for 6 months working, you know, like in New York and going to all the bars. And when I moved to London to open ECC, when I was going to bar, I was like, what is no sugar in those drinks? It was so dry, you know. I was not used to that. And then after that, you know, of course I got used to it, but yeah, it's different. If you go to Miami, for example, it's very, very sweet. Like people from Miami, you go to New York, they think the drink are dry. So,
but okay. Yeah, but like Miami is the kind of place where you got these huge margarita glasses, right? With I remember those are the biggest cocktail glasses I've ever seen there in Miami. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Miami, but you know, and it goes as well for other cities. Not only for dryness or sweetness. Some country, for example, if you go to Cyprus or Lebanon, there's no drink with egg. No drink. When I do Geschiff, I always ask what people like, because if you do a drink with egg, no one will order it. In Lebanon, for example, they have, you know, they put a lot of citrus lemon in their food, so they have more sour palate. So it's all the drink you're gonna have will be more on the sour side.
So let's talk a little bit about Mace. What was the concept behind it, and how did you go about opening it?
So the concept originally, I wanted to do something with travels, you know, like to bring flavors from all the food I have, because that's a bit how I build my drink, you know, with taste and flavor that I meet when I travel. But for Greg, my business partner who owns Cocktail Kingdom as well, you know, Greg. Yeah. He was like, oh no, let's do something not as complicated. So we were like, why not doing spices, you know, because spice is very easy to understand for everyone. People cook, and it's basically you pretty much have it in all the drinks. So we decided to do that. Then we had to find a name. I wanted a spice name. Clove was my favorite, to be honest, but you have already Clover Club.
Yeah.
You have Clove Club. So it was like too used, and we wanted something that's easy to understand and remember as well. So short, and Mace, I think, was a good fit. Yeah. Except for the fact that I didn't know that it was as well as pepper spray.
Oh, really?
And a medieval weapon, with the chain and the ball. So some people who don't know, because mace is not the most famous spice. People, what kind of bar is that? Like with this stupid name, like with pepper spray.
And how did that go?
Good. Well received. After opening, we entered the 50 best. We were nominated at Tales for World Best Menu. We won Most Creative Cocktail List Time Out Award. So a lot of stuff here and there that gave us recognition. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And how old is Mace now?
No, it's 4 years. Yeah, we opened in 2014. No, 15. So 4 years. 4 years, but we moved the location recently.
How come?
Because the first place was a bit too small. We didn't have a kitchen. The prep was a bit complicated. We had to always to do it on the bar. Now we have a bigger space. We have 2 rooms. We have a kitchen and better location, to be honest, because Macy's was at the end of East Village and you have to walk there. And if you don't take a cab, it can be a long walk, very hot in summer, very cold in winter. So I think we had less traffic and now the location is way better. It's going to be 2 blocks from the new subway exit from the L line, so it's good. We saw it right away, and the numbers almost double when we opened the new place.
No way,
Yeah,
really?
yeah.
Oh, that's good for you then. Very good. Have you ever thought about opening another maze?
Yes, I had that conversation actually yesterday.
Okay. So we'll leave that there.
We'll see, but I need to talk to Greg. Mace is not only mine, so we have to agree both on what to do next. But I think especially in this part of the world, it would be a good fit.
Talk to us a little bit about your other ventures.
So, Danico is. I was not supposed to go back to Paris. I wanted to live in New York, but 2 friends of mine showed me the space for Danico in the Galerie Vivienne. It's an old Jean-Paul Gaultier showroom, famous boutique he had, and the place is beautiful. And I was like, no, I can't say no to that. So we opened Danico. There's no concept like Mace, it's more like a cocktail bar. We have a lab. We do like a drink, the same style of drink. I actually use some drinks for both venues, But yeah, we decided to do it, and I hired Thibaut at that time. When I knew we opened Danico, I asked him if he wanted to be the bar manager. I brought him to Mace a little bit for a few months to work, and then he opened it, and I'm very happy with it. Yeah, we have a good team.
How did you get to know Thibaut?
I met Thibaut at Happiness Forgets. When I was bartending, he came, and he was like young, no beard, and he looks like 12 years old.
Okay.
He asked me.
He looks very young with a beard. I can't imagine him without a beard. Yeah.
Without a beard, yeah. and it was in 2014. So, and I think I introduced him to Alex Kratena to work at Artisan, but I think his English was not good enough at the moment. So he joined Experimental Cocktail Club. Then he started working there, and then I saw him again in New York. We started hanging out. I saw like he was, he has a food background as well. He worked for Alexandre Gauthier à la Grenouillère. I thought we were like very compatible. We love the same thing. And I thought, it was a good fit. He's an amazing bar manager, but he's as well one of my best friends.
Talk to us a little bit about the cocktail scene in Paris.
Cocktail scene in Paris, it's growing. It's been changing so much. Now you have more than 50 bars. You have amazing bars, that's for sure. It's slowing down a little bit now. There is like so many bars opening at some point, but I think people realize it's not that easy to make money with a cocktail bar in France. It's the staff cost is huge, and the clientele is not the one that goes all the time in cocktails bar. Then they go like, to brasserie. We don't have as well like that after work stuff that you can have in New York. So it's a good city. You have a recognition for the bar. You have a lot of different type of bar. But yes, it's not the easiest business. So some people, when they open their own, some open a second one. And I think a lot of people realize, it's better to have just 1 or 2.
Yeah, no, and there's still a lot of wine, is it?
Yeah. Wine, a lot of wine and beers as well, so it's, I'm not saying it's not busy, the bar are busy, of course, but the cost of the rent, the cost of the spirits and the staff costs are pretty high, so it's not the easiest city to open a cocktail bar.
You travel quite a lot, as we established, with work. How do you go about organizing all these travels? Like, do you sit down at the beginning of the year and plan, or
I
is it
do
more-
6 months, around 6 months plan ahead. Is the good fit for the moment. Usually people ask me, oh, do you want to come here, come there to get shifts? So I always say, well, let's talk a bit later because I have a list. And then I take an order, I will contact the people and say, okay, so if you want to do it, we can do it in 6 months, in 7 months. And then I organize that like that. And then you have the bar show as well in the middle. And yeah.
So when you go to a venue, do you bring some standardized cocktails across the board, or do you tailor the menu according to the destination where you go? So say, do you have like 10 drinks that you always use, or you say, oh, I'm going to New York, therefore I'm making this, I'm going to Paris, I make this, I'm going to Tokyo, I make this?
No, it's, of course, first, it's not always the same brands. Because, sometimes I'm going to be sent somewhere by Bacardi, sometimes it's going to be with Diageo, sometimes with Maison Ferrand. So this is the first thing that changed. Yes, I have a handful of cocktails that I use a lot. I sometimes create drinks for the destination, but to be honest, like we have now like so many a range of so many drinks between Danico and Maze that I just choose the one with the right fit.
Okay,
for
so
the
yeah, you've got a big pool to choose from.
Yeah, big pool to choose.
What are the challenges that you have when you travel abroad?
Hangovers.
Hangovers, that's number one probably, yeah. How much stuff do you pack in terms of ingredients and glasses? Do you bring your own menus?
No. I used to bring the one from Maze, but I stopped doing that. But I should do it again. It's just a matter of weight, Like you have 23 kilos, and sometimes I have not enough room for it. Same, like I do bar tools with Cocktail Kingdom. I have mixed in like a metal stirring glass, and I'm raising some shakers soon as well. But they're heavy as well, so I can't really bring them with me. But I always pack the same thing. There's always like but ingredients and tools I don't bring with me. It's more like like clothes and CrossFit shoes.
Okay, you bring zero ingredients with you?
No. So, I bring ingredients when they don't have it. For example, a lot of countries they don't have tonka beans. So
they're illegal in some countries.
Yeah,
as well,
in America it's illegal. I think here too now.
Yeah, also legal in Singapore. Yeah.
So that kind of stuff I will bring, and sometime if it's not too much, I will bring a milk punch, for example, the whole drink together. But usually the team, the bar where I'm going, they're really good, so they do the prep perfectly. Almost every time.
Almost, yeah.
There's some incidents sometimes.
Of course, but that's why we work in bars,
Exactly.
right? Because we like incidents. What is, talking about incidents, what's the funniest travel incident that's happened to you in an airport? Because for instance, to kickstart, I remember once I landed in Rome, I was doing some events there, and then I repacked and I was going to, I think, Oslo, and I went to the airport and I forgot my knives in my hand luggage. So then I went through security, right? And I can see my luggage. I goes to the side. I say, "Oh, what did I forget? My deodorant now." And the guy's like, "Oh, do you have any sharp objects in your bag?" And I'm like, "No." It's like, "What did I forget? My deodorant." And the guy's like, "No, it's not your deodorant." And then you open and you find these huge knives,
my
man.
God.
Yeah. Luckily, they allowed me to check them in, but yeah, he was super upset about it. They called the police.
They called the police.
Yeah. So they had the luggage on the side, and then they called the police. And I had to wait for a police officer to show up. And then there was a police officer next to me, and the guy was inspecting my luggage. Wow. So, yeah, I was pretty scared
with that, I've got always, little problem. They look, and I travel with, like the balls. It's like massage balls. I use a lot for soft tissue work, with CrossFit. And when they make me open the bag, it really looks like some weird dildos, So people are looking at me. I'm like, oh, I always hate when they open my bag with those stuff. I almost not take them anymore because
really?
of that.
Yeah. So people in the airport think that you're a weird dildo collecting guy.
They take it. Say, what is that? Super loud. Like the one is looking. It's horrible.
You seem to be pretty much a lot into CrossFit, right?
Yes. It's a good balance for me. Like we do work, travel, a lot of drinking. I love eating as well, and CrossFit for me is a good balance. I need it in my life because it could be another sport. I think you need to balance with sport. When you work and travel and drink, it makes you healthier, I guess. You sweat the alcohol. Like yesterday, I was feeling so bad, and I went to CrossFit, sweated out, and felt great after. So.
Mm-hmm. So this is one of the tools that you use to make sure that you keep. traveling.
It's CrossFit is a bit everywhere, so it's kind of easy to find a box and go and train. And if not, you just find a gym and just work out. But yeah.
Talking to bartenders that are somewhere slightly established in their career, but they still have to make the big jump, what kind of recommendation would you give them in order for them to get themselves out there?
Well, it's two stuff. First, don't be in a rush. I see a lot of young guys. They don't want to work behind the bar, but they want to travel and do what I do, for example. But I did 10 years, more than 10 years behind the bar before starting to travel. They come and they say, oh, I want to do fat wash, but I say, oh, tell me about the distillation process, and they don't know. So, my first advice is first do your class, work as a barback, was a bartender, do that for a while. And then if you want to be out there, I guess, you have to meet people, you have to be on the bar show, you have to go to masterclass, you have to do guest shift, you have to be out there, you have to travel. Mm-hmm. And the more you travel, the more you will travel. Mm-hmm. So it's like that. Me, I'm lucky. I travel a lot, but I'm single. If I had a wife at home or kids, I couldn't do that. You need to be very flexible to be able to travel as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you'll stop traveling as much as you do at some point?
I don't think I'll stop traveling. I was talking to someone who told me that when people who travel a lot like that, when they stop traveling, they get depressed. I see it at home. If I stay 2 weeks at home, I'm already moving, I need to do something.
Really?
Yeah. So it's getting itchy. So, less probably, because it's like last year I've been to 28 countries, for example. Mm-hmm. This year I think it's going to be more. So it's intense. But stop traveling, never. I love it too much. There's so many new places I haven't been. I've been to 87 countries. There's around 200 countries in the world. So
that's crazy to think, huh?
Yeah.
That there's so many places that we just don't even think about.
Yeah, exactly. In some continents we're not really accessible. You look at Africa, for example. I only been to South Africa, Morocco, and Tunisia, but there's so many. It's a whole continent. So many things to discover. But it's not really showcased. People always talk about Kenya, the safari, but it's a whole continent with, I'm sure, so many, even the food, the spices, so many stuff we don't know.
When you travel, do you tend to take ideas and then bring them back to your bar from your travels?
Yes. And, I don't like to really copy. Mm-hmm. But of course, it can be ingredients, it can be, glassware or, or sometimes design idea for your next bar. One of my favorite bar in the world is Operation Dagger, and I really love the design inside. Those bulbs.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
I would love to have that in my bar, but that would be copying. So I can't do that. But from that place, I got inspired. from many places, from many bars.
Yeah,
people.
It's a very fine line in between copying a place and taking inspiration from it. But I think there are certain standout features that some places have, and that's theirs, and you can't touch it anymore. So you can take maybe inspiration from a shape of a vessel or a glass, but as you said, the light bulbs, that's Operation Dagger. If you do anything, that's such a cool idea you had there.
It's actually Thibaut showed me. It was so that was part of an exposition, I think. So those bulbs, yeah.
Oh really?
Look really like arts apparently. So he takes a lot of inspiration from all those stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I was at one of his masterclasses once, and he said that it's just they have this wall of lights, right? And they just change randomly. There's not really a thought process behind which one light bulb they change, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So whenever they feel like, there should be a bit of light there, they just move it over. But it's got such a great atmosphere. Right?
Yeah, it's atmosphere. It's not a bar for everyone, for sure, but atmosphere. The drinks are fantastic. When I went the first time, I tried the whole menu. Boom, it's so good.
What other bars do you really like in terms of design?
There's so many. Look at, the most beautiful room in the world probably is Atlas.
It's such a beautiful bar. Huh?
It's insane. I really love Himcock, Manhattan Bar. There's so many in the world.
Yeah, we are very lucky because in our industry, if you work in say design or anything, it's something that is not tied to a room. Sometimes when you go around, there's only ugly offices that you see. Well, we get to see some amazing places, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, there's some city where of course it's less stuff to visit. I was in Houston recently. And it's not a city where you're going to spend days walking around. You know, it's a very business city, but has a great scene, so you can really have fun. But yeah, you're not going to walk around the city in Houston, for example. Yeah. But then you go to a place like Tokyo, you have like millions of bars, and when you can walk around all day, all night, cities like Paris, Roma, Singapore.
If you didn't live in New York, where would you see yourself?
So I moved back to Paris.
So now you live in Paris for?
I live in Paris. I moved back in last July. I'm still in New York a lot. You know, I go there every 2 months, taking care of maize, but I moved back to Paris to be more central and it's a bit easier with Europe. So if it was not New York or Paris, I mean, Sydney, I love Singapore, I love Tokyo. But to live is a different story. So I couldn't live in Tokyo, for example. It's too different. But I made a joke recently on Facebook. It was April 1st, and I was walking around in.
I read that the bar thing. Yeah,
I was walking around Tokyo, and I see an empty space, you know, and I had my Airbnb key in my pocket, so I just took a picture of it. Oh, finally, I have the key of my new bar in Tokyo, and it all went mad banana after that.
Yeah, I think there's still people asking you.
People are sending CV and asking me at the 50 best the other day, like, wow, what about the bar in Tokyo? What about the bar in Tokyo? I put on Facebook, stop sending me CVs. It was a joke.
You must open a bar now because you already have the stuff lined up, no?
Yeah, well, I like for there, yeah, but Tokyo again, you know, it's for me it will be very complicated. I don't even speak Japanese. How can you can't open a bar in a country where you don't speak the language?
I think you'd have to find a person you really trust who can run that. But I think in Japan it's just very complicated, is it? Yeah.
It's very complicated. There's a lot of bars. It's very complicated to make money as well because, you know, in Japan, you can open a bar if you find a room. You don't need a liquor license. So you need just the inspector to come, the health inspection, and then pay for the tax for the city, and that's it. So there's so many bars. In Ginza itself, there's 800 bars, more than 800 bars in Ginza. And in the whole Tokyo, there's many. So a lot of them, they're not very busy. Shingo was telling me that SJ Club that it just opened is the busiest bar in Japan, but it's way less busy than Spiklo in Shanghai. So yeah, you have to see as well. You know, it's fun to open a bar in a cool city, but it's business as well. You have to it has to be profitable.
I was speaking with Ueno about it, and he said to me one of the things that they do is you work yourself with a master, and then you establish yourself, and then when your name is big enough, then you go and move into your own bar, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you it's like a bit like the kitchen before, you know, like you peel potato for 1 year and then you make ratatouille for 1 year and then, you know, you make your way up. In Japan, it's very like that. And you see, there's not many Japanese bartenders really traveling who do things international, like Shingo, you have Ueno, you have a few other guys, but that's it.
It's an handful. Considering how many bars you have, it's literally like very, very few bartenders.
Yeah, but because as well, you know, a lot of bars there, there's only one bartender. Is the owner, and the guy is gonna come, he open, he close, and if he's not there, the bar is closed. So they don't travel; they just have their holidays, and that's it.
What's the ideal size of a bar, in your opinion?
I think around like between 60 and 80 seats, I guess.
Okay, so reasonably small.
60, I think, is good. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many stations would you have in a bar? It's like that size.
Two
stations. Yeah.
2 stations.
So do you like your bar to be like a dominant feature of the room, or do you like it to be something on the side?
No, to be dominant. Yeah, you know, it has to be the central nerves, and actually, you know, like in a bar, I like the bar to be next to the door, to the entry. So even if you have the bartender, you can really like have eye contacts and greet people at the same time. When the bar is in the end, you know, people sometimes they're a little bit afraid to come in. If you have 5 people sit at the bar only in the bar is at the beginning, people from the street, they come and see people and they come in. But if you have those 4 people at the bar that's at the end of the room, the whole place looks empty. So that's the advantage to have that and to be the central nerve, you know, like of the bar.
When you design menus and when you design drinks for your venues, what's the sort of style that you want to achieve? Because to give you some examples, for instance, I was speaking to Matt the other day, Matt Wiley, and he was saying to me that when he designs drinks for his venues in London, he likes to think about what's the best expression of it, and then without thinking too much about practicality. While when he designed this venue in Sydney, said a lot of people come to the bar to order. So I design all my drinks to make sure that my guests can hold it in one hand and take it to the table safely.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. I never thought about that actually. No. To be honest, I design the drinks. I always do the same thing. You know, I have a 12 drinks menu.
Always 12?
Always 12. I do one spirit. I'm not going to repeat the spirit. I'm not going to repeat the flavor. If there's ginger, I'm not going to put ginger into drinks. And there's so many spirits, so I try to do always, like one pisco, one vodka, one rum, one cachaça, etc. And then I don't start when I design drink from I'm gonna do an aquavit drink. I'm gonna start from flavor. So I have a file on my computer and iPhone where every time I travel, every time I see something interesting like flavor combination, I write it down. And when I design a menu, I open that file and I'm like, oh yeah, that wasabi horseradish, that's wasabi pomelo. I'm going to make a drink with it, like so pomelo, grapefruit, and then I did a twist of the paloma with it. Right? I start from those flavors that I had in Japan. I had a dessert with pomelo and wasabi that was amazing. And then it became in the end a paloma. But I didn't start, I'm going to make a twist of the paloma.
Okay, so you work your way from the flavors that you want to recreate. Yeah. Have you ever had any challenges with putting a drink on the menu and you realize that people didn't really like it?
Yes, of course. You make your own mistake. You live and learn. But sometimes I get very challenging. I wanted to do once a twist of the dirty martini, but more with a shiitake brine, and there was some moss, like moss infused. It was not really good. And
you still put it on the menu?
Yeah, we put it on the menu, but then I move it.
You realize that maybe this wasn't my best creation.
but in the end of the day, after as well, like it's you have drink. They're not gonna be sold a lot, but bartenders, for example, they will drink that one. They are very challenging, but not for everyone. Call that the joker drinks. And then you have some drink that everyone's gonna order. If you put a red drink or with raspberry, for example, everyone
crowd pleaser, everyone's gonna order.
But generally, it's things are working well. Otherwise, you just rebalance it a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, and readjust. Yeah. Speaking lastly about industry events, there are a lot of bar shows at the moment, like around the world.
I can't even name them anymore. Yeah. Like there's so many. The next one I'm going is Perfect Serve in Amsterdam. So I'm doing a conference there, and after that, I'm from this year. There's the bar show in France called Cocktail Spirits every year. It's 12th edition already. And this year, so they have a stage called Le Bar Rouge where bar comes and they do presentation. It's a really good concept they have because it's presentation about the bar and the scene and not about a product or stuff like that. And they bring bars from all around the world. So I'm in charge this year to make the selection of the bars and as well to talk on the stage, to introduce the stage. So that one is a big part of my schedule this year. Yeah.
Do you think so? There's a growing number of bar shows.
There's number. You have Athens. You have, like Lisbon. I think is coming. Oslo. There's something in Tokyo right now. No.
Yeah, it was last week. Last weekend. Yeah.
Some I haven't been. I haven't been to the one in Athens. 2 weeks ago we were in Bar Engage. It's one in Larissa in Greece. That was really, really, really good. So it's growing. There's more bar show and some bar show are getting bigger and bigger. So you can make pretty much your own schedule all year according to bar show if you want. Yeah.
Do you think we're reaching the point where there's too many?
I don't know because there is too many for who? For us. But there's no. When you live in a country, you want a bar show. So if you put bar show in every city, it's good for all those cities.
For the communities, yeah.
So for us. On the schedule, yes, maybe, but the more bar show you have and the more our world and the cocktail bar, the spirits is you're gonna reach more people, so it's very good.
It's a fantastic point of view, actually. Last question is a question I ask to everyone. If you could choose your very last drink, what would your last drink be?
Something with pandan.
Really?
It will probably a smackery. A smackery?
Yeah, of course.
That will be a smackery because I think people want me to die with that drink, I think.
Cool. Thank you very much for finding the time, Nico.
Thanks
it was
for having
amazing.
Me.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our interview with Nico. We are unjiggered_media on Instagram, and you can follow our accounts at mmariotti89 for Michele, Alex J. Murphy for myself, and Adrian Bessa for Adrian. Thank you for listening.